Hey guys, it's Jane from Van, and today I'm doing a follow-up video or a part 2 on Elrond. I recently made a video about Elrond, which I'll link to at the top right corner as well as at the end of this video. That video focused on Elrond, on his brother Elros, and their respective choice to live an immortal and a mortal life. In today's video, I'm going to only focus on Elrond because there is a lot to say about this character. A character who walked the earth for no fewer than 6,520 years. So for the sake of simplicity and coherence, I'm going to do a bit of a chronological exploration of Elrond. I'm going to mainly draw on information from Elrond in the books, but I'll sprinkle in some examples of Elrond and Jackson's trilogy because Jackson didn't wander too far off the beaten path in depicting Elrond on the big screen. And like many, and if not all, the characters in Jackson's trilogy, the casting was really good. Hugo Weaving nailed the character to a T.
You have only one choice. The ring must be destroyed.
Now, as you may or may not know, the chronology of Middle-earth is divided into 4 ages. The first age lasted just a little over 600 years and ended when the Valar overthrew Morgoth. The second age lasted about 3,400 years and ended after the War of the Last Alliance, and it ended with the overthrow of Morgoth's servant Sauron and the taking of the One Ring by Isildur. The third age lasted over 3,000 years and ended after the War of the Ring. As for the fourth age, Tolkien tells us in Appendix B, the fourth age was not held to have begun until Master Elrond departed, and the time was come for the dominion of men and the decline of all speaking people in Middle-earth. The very fact that Tolkien associates Elrond with a turning point in the chronology of Middle-earth is a pretty big deal and reinforces the suggestion that Elrond is a very important figure in Tolkien's work, which makes sense. Elrond was born in the first age of Middle-earth in the year 532 and left Middle-earth in the year 3021 of the Third Age, meaning he was around for over 6,000 years of drama and was instrumental in a victory over Sauron on 2 different occasions. I don't think we can say that much about other characters, if any. The only folks who could have maybe been around were elves, but when the shadow of Sauron arose and started to gather power in Mordor at the end of the Third Age, many elves started to leave Middle-earth, and only a small number of elves remained in Middle-earth by the time of the War of the Ring. Now, Tolkien sprinkles bits and pieces of information about the First Age in The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings through flashbacks or explanations, but we have to read chapter 24 of the Silmarillion, Unfinished Tales, as well as the appendix to gather information about the First Age, because as great as Tolkien was, a narrative flow can only withstand a certain number of flashbacks. Okay, so what was Elrond up to in the First Age of Middle-earth? Well, the timing of his birth was kind of shitty, and things were turbulent from the get-go. Elrond and his twin brother Elros were born at the end of the First Age in Arvarnien, which is located southwest of Beleriand, and Beleriand was located west of Middle-earth. When Elrond and his twin brother were infants, their mother Elwing had in her possession a Silmaril. A Silmaril was a dangerous gem to be safeguarding because at that time, this group of men called the Sons of Fëanor vowed to retrieve the Silmarils from anyone who had one in their possessions. So when the Sons of Fëanor heard that Elrond's mom had one, they attacked the village, and when that happened, Elrond's mom abandoned her kids and jumped into the sea with the Silmaril. While she's definitely not a prime candidate for Mother of the Year, let's not judge her too much right now. We'll get back to her a little bit later. After being abandoned by their mom, Elrond and Elros were kidnapped by the 2 Sons of Fëanor, and what happened next is very interesting. You'd think that the Sons of Fëanor would have killed the young brothers, but Tolkien tells us towards the end of the Silmarillion that one of them, Maglor, took pity upon the twins, rescued them, and a great love grew between Maglor and the twins. Now, it's not clear how long they stayed in the cave under Maglor's care, and from my digging in the book, a good piece of information is found in letter 221 when Tolkien explains that the twins were eventually found in the cave. It's unclear how long they lived as Maglor's adopted children. My guess is anywhere between a few months to 30 or 50 years before Maglor upped and left to fight in the War of Wrath. If anybody has info about their time in Maglor's captivity, please let me know in the comments. I'm also unsure if it's pronounced Maglor or Malor, so please let me know in the comments if you have the tea on that. I'm also not sure when or if Elrond and his brothers ever reunited with their mom and dad. I didn't find any information on that, so I suspect not. What I do know though is that when Elwyn jumped into the sea with the Silmaril, she turned into a bird and returned to her husband Eärendil. At that time, the forces of Morgoth, aka Public Enemy Number 1, he controlled most of Beleriand. By the year 587 of the First Age, when Elrond was about 50 years old, Beleriand was mostly destroyed and it was submerged under the sea as a result of the War of Wrath. The War of Wrath was a war that was fought between the Valar and Morgoth. Elrond didn't take part in this war because he was just a wee little lad at that time, and neither did his parents. But it was his parents who convinced the Valar to take up arms against Morgoth. And because of that, the entire family had the privilege to choose between a mortal or an immortal life. Elrond chose the latter, and therefore alive and well 6,500 years later during the events of the War of the Rings. Now, during his council, the Council of Elrond, he drops a few lines about the First Age and the War of Wrath. Right before he forms the Fellowship of the Ring, he tells everybody about the glory of the Elder Days and describes how he remembers the splendor of the banners as well as the host of Beleriand, which consisted of an assembly of many great princes and captains. He also explains that when the war was on, the elves thought that that would be the last of evil, but that they were ultimately dead wrong. So when we analyze the first 50 years of Elrond's life, we see that it's a pretty turbulent story. Although he was the son of two very important characters in the Legendarium, neither of them were parents of the year. His father, Eärendil, was a mariner who loved the sea, and when Elrond was a toddler, he abandoned his children and went off to sea. And shortly after that, of course, when his home came under attack by the sons of Fëanor, their mother bailed, and he and his brother were carried off by their attackers. It's all pretty grim, but in Tolkien's world, it's important to remember that everything happens for a reason. And while Elwyn and Eärendil could have benefited from some parenting classes, it was the attack on his homeland and the kidnapping of his sons that gave Eärendil the courage to go to Valinor and beg the Valar to get involved and help the people of Middle-earth achieve victory against Morgoth. The First Age draws to an end after all of this drama, and all we know is that Elrond was about 50 years old, he was immortal, his adoptive father started to slip away from the annals of history, and Morgoth's servant Sauron was gaining power and was starting to twinkle with the creation of rings. Now, the Second Age. The Second Age is when Amazon's Middle-earth TV series, aka Latron Prime, is set to take place in, which of course is a long time before the settings of Jackson's trilogy. The producers have been super secretive about the storylines, the characters, and even the plot, but what we can say for sure is that the story is set to take place in the Second Age, which means that we'll hopefully get to see a young version of Elrond. By young, I mean when Elrond was a young and strapping 50 to 3,000-year-old lad. Now, we're January and the series is set to come up in September 2nd, 2022, so about 9 months to go. A lot happens in the Second Age. The 3 elven rings are forged, Elrond's brother Elros founds the line of Númenóreans on the island of Númenor, the One Ring is forged, Barad-dûr gets completed, Sauron openly proclaims himself as Public Enemy Number 1, Sauron is taken to Númenor as a prisoner, Númenor sinks, Arnor and Gondor are founded, the last alliance of men and elf defeats Sauron, and Isildur fucks up.
Destroy it! No.
During the Council of Elrond, Elrond also briefed the company on the key events, on those key events of the Second Age during the Fellowship of the Ring, during the council. He spoke about the island of Numenor and its eventual sinking. He spoke about Numenor being where the Numenorean kings ruled, from who the Dunedain, or the Men of the West, descend, and who eventually found Gondor. He spoke of the events of Sauron and the Rings of Power that were designed to seduce the rulers of Middle-earth. He spoke of King Elendil and his sons Anarion and Isildur, as well as the kingdom of Anor. Anarion and Isildur are the two figures who make up the Argonath, which look absolutely incredible in Jackson's trilogy. He also spoke of the Battle of the Last Alliance. He calls the victory fruitless, which it was, because even though the alliance of elves and men was victorious, Isildur fucked up and kept the ring. An interesting thing to note about the passage is that the narrator, or Tolkien, explains that Elrond's tale, and I'll quote here, is a long tale, full of deeds, great and terrible, and briefly though Elrond spoke, the sun rode up the sky and the morning was passing, ere he ceased. So it essentially took Elrond all morning, or many hours, to quickly recap the events of the last 6,000 years. And I get it. I too am still getting familiar with the events of the Second Age, but I did dig around the books a lot, and I did settle on a few important Elrond moments that I want to share in this video. Elrond had a lot of responsibilities throughout the Second Age, and amid all of the drama associated with the forging of the rings and the First War against Sauron, he became a close advisor to High King Gil-galad. Gil-galad is a very important elf, and amid the long list of responsibilities that he had, Gil-galad was the keeper of Vilya, one of the 3 elven rings. And when he died, he passed the ring to Elrond, and Elrond bore Vilya throughout the remaining of the Second Age and the entirety of the Third Age. It was also at the end of the Second Age that Elrond founded Imladris, or Rivendell. There is an argument to be made that Elrond's ring offered some sort of preservation of Rivendell, and Elrond's ownership of the ring is what enabled Rivendell to remain as such a beautiful place. It's also possible that the ring kept Rivendell safe, like it did for Galadriel and Lothlorien, but this is all speculation, and the truth is the power of the elven rings are a little vague, although it is speculated that Vilya boosted Elrond's natural inclination to heal. We see this in the Fellowship of the Ring. When the Witch King of Angmar stabbed Frodo at Weathertop, he was quickly sent to Elrond to be healed. There is also speculation that Vilya could control certain elements. Again, this is based on the fact that Elrond could summon a very angry wave of water horses when the ringwraiths attempted to cross the Brunnen River as they chased after Frodo. This remains speculation, but it's not too far of a stretch, because from what I know so far, elves didn't necessarily have the power to command elements like that. But with Vilya in hand, Elrond could literally command rivers and change flows of water. That being said, what we do know for sure is that when the elven rings were created, they were still pure and not tainted by evil, as they were never touched by Sauron, and therefore they could not corrupt its keepers. What we also know for sure is that upon Sauron's fall and the destruction of the One Ring, the powers of the elven rings faded. Now, let's dive into the Third Age. Although a lot of drama happens in the Third Age, Elrond, who is now over 3,000 years old, kind of starts to settle down, takes a bit of a backseat, and stays out of the battlefield for the most part. But he's not immune to the shitstorm that Sauron had unleashed on Middle-earth, and he deals with a lot of personal tragedies throughout the Third Age. During the Third Age, Elrond married the love of his life, early in the Third Age. Her name was Lady Calabrian, and she was the daughter of Galadriel and Celeborn. The two met 1600 years earlier in 1701 of the Second Age, when Galadriel went to Rivendell along with her daughter, Elrond's future wife. This account is recounted in part 2 of Unfinished Tales, which is entitled The History of Galadriel and Celeborn. Tolkien tells us in this passage that It was then that Elrond first saw Celebrian and loved her, though he said nothing. So Elrond kept his crush hidden for 1849 years because he only married his wife in year 109 of the Third Age. The marriage was a good one, and they built a lovely family together. First, Celebrian gave birth to twin boys, followed by his daughter Arwen. The first 2,500 years of the Third Age was a period of relative peace for the family. Well, relatively speaking, and by Middle-earth standards anyways. That's not to say that it was a period of peace, because with Sauron's spirit out and about on a desperate pursuit for his one ring through his various servants, things were still going apeshit all over Middle-earth. The Witch King of Akmar invaded Arnor and destroyed the Tower of Amon-Sul, also known as Weathertop. A great plague went about the land. The dwarves, after centuries of greed and digging for mithril and minerals, woke up a Balrog who had been asleep since the First Age. When that happened, the dwarves they kind of just bailed, and Khazad-dûm was henceforth referred to as Moria, which means black pit. Also during that time, the Uruk-hai were invented. Osgiliath began to fall into ruin. The Easterlings attacked Gondor. Gondor and Arnor formed an alliance. The kingdom of Arnor got destroyed. Balrog appeared in Moria and slew Durin. And Smeagol was born during the Third Age as well. And this is just to name a few events. But back in Rivendell, when all of this was going on, things were going well for Elrond and his family, until things took a tragic hit. In the year 2509 of the Third Age, his wife was making the journey from her home in Rivendell to her parents' home in Lothlorien. But on this occasion, when she was crossing the Misty Mountains, she was ambushed by orcs and subsequently captured. The orcs kept her prisoner in their caves, and during that time they tormented and poisoned her until her spirit was completely broken as a result of the traumatic experience. Her sons, her twin boys, eventually rolled out and rescued her, and although Elrond was able to physically heal her body, he could not heal her spirit or her mind because the torment was simply too great. The following year, she left. His wife's despair of life had gone so great that she left Elrond and her children behind and sailed away to the Undying Lands. When we fast forward to the very end of the Third Age, when Elrond leaves Middle-earth, we witness a very bittersweet moment. When the Third Age officially wrapped up and Sauron is defeated, Elrond grew weary of Middle-earth, and after taking part of events on the continent for over 6,500 years, he was of course due for some serious R&R. So leaving Middle-earth is bittersweet because although he would be reunited with his wife, he would never see his daughter again because she chose an immortal life on Middle-earth. This also meant that he would never meet his grandson. Not only that, but he also loses Aragorn, who was kind of like his adopted child because Elrond took it upon himself to foster the various heirs of Isildur, which of course led to Aragorn growing up under his care in Rivendell. What's interesting about that, just like Aragorn, Elrond was in a way an orphan. Remember that in the First Age, when his parents bailed, he was raised by Maglor, and 6,500 years later, he's essentially reliving gloomy feelings of separation, but this time from the point of view of an adopted father rather than the adopted child. It's also not super great that once he gets to Valinor, he'll have to explain to his wife that she will also never meet or see her daughter again. Remember that an elf giving up immortality like Arwen did is a pretty rare occurrence. So when Celebrian left her children, she had every reason to believe that Arwen would eventually join her in Valinor for an immortal life, and mother and daughter would be reunited. Now, I don't blame Celebrian for leaving Middle-earth after what she went through under the captivity of the orcs. But once again, Elrond is reliving an episode of his early years because remember that in the First Age of Middle-earth, his own mother, also for good reasons, abandoned her children. It's also possible that Elrond's son could have opted for a mortal life as well, but that information is not spelled out in the sources, so when Elrond leaves, it's unclear to him if he would ever see his sons again as well. Despite all of this drama and death, I think we can say with a relatively certain degree of certitude that if there is one character in all of Tolkien's Legendarium who could put up with bullshit after bullshit, it has to be Elrond. This is the guy who, well, in the film anyways, this is the guy who resisted the urge to push Isildur off the cliff with the ring. I mean, come on, nobody would have suspected a thing, and this could have easily been ruled an accident. Elrond is also the guy who formed the Fellowship of the Ring. Elrond was the Lord of Rivendell. Elrond was the mightiest among both men and elves. Elrond is the guy who patiently waited nearly 2,000 years to wed the love of his life, and the subsequent 500 years after her departure to finally sail to the west to finally be reunited with the love of his life. So although Elrond left many loved ones behind when he leaves, we know that he certainly has the patience to wait to see if his sons will show up in Valinor one day. And if they don't, I'm sure that in the company of all the wise folks up in Valinor, which includes his beloved wife, Gandalf, Galadriel, he'll have access to the best counseling one can dream of. Elrond was really instrumental in good's victory over evil, and both during his time on Middle-earth and after his departure, he was and will be remembered as a badass and one of the greatest voices of reason on the entire continent. So, okay, that's it for this video. I touched on a lot of events and places and people, all of which merit their own video. So if you have any recommendations, let me know in the comments. And if you wish, like this video and subscribe to my channel. It really does help. Farewell.